Welcome to the Mad Love Your Life show. I'm Mary D, the Joy Catalyst, here to be your host and transformation guide. Mad Love is about the mad, making a difference, and love is what we serve up to live a delicious life. My intention is to help you spark new ideas, break limiting beliefs, and align with your deepest dreams and desires. Get ready for laughter, inspiration, and finding your inner roar in every show. I don't know about y'all, but I'm excited to celebrate freedom this month. And I'm grateful that I live in a place that has an abundance of freedom, that I get to practice freedom of speech, to decide when and what I want to talk about or stay quiet about, freedom of religion or no religion, the freedom to wear what I want and go where I want and think about whatever I want. How about you? What is a freedom that you have in your life right now that you're so grateful for? Like, what is that thing? And as you get a news story or you see what's happening in other parts of the world, does it surprise you? Because we have such a different baseline of freedom here than a lot of countries do. And I think sometimes we lose sight of that. And other times, I think we're really great at celebrating it. So for today, I hope you all are celebrating your freedom. I'm happy because I'm free, and I'm free because I'm happy. And I also want to recognize that this is not always where everyone lands. I was talking to a friend this week about mental health and so much of how the way we all respond to life is through how we feel or perceive something. And in this observation, we started talking about a person's baseline. And to give you an example of that, I'm a natural optimist. So from birth, for whatever reason, my inclination is to see the good in anything and everything. So if my house burned down tomorrow, I would show up and I would be like, oh, look at that. I got to go furniture shopping. Whereas I'm sure you know people, or maybe this issue, when someone is highly anxious or things stress them out easily, that could feel catastrophic and grave and like the sky is falling. For the friend that I was talking with, he was raised in a home that unfortunately had some violence. And his natural inclination, which of course is also influenced by his trauma, makes him actually inclined to see the world as unsafe as his baseline. So when I walk into a room, I expect to see people smiling and laughing and people ready to connect. He walks into that same room, and for him, he's on high alert and he's anxious and he's waiting for something bad to happen. This friend of mine, he grew up with privilege and wealth. He's incredibly handsome. And not just because I'm telling you he's handsome, but because he's someone who just universally is handsome. He has the right build. He's tall, but not too tall. He's very symmetrical. He has a nice voice. He's well put together. He's financially savvy, successful in his career, has lots of credentials, Ivy League education. He's well-traveled, athletic, healthy, and by all accounts, as you hear me describe him, I'm sure you're like, how is he not the happiest guy on the planet? He literally has all these stars lined up for him where it seems like life is in this really beautiful ease and flow. But for him, he's really not internally. And his baseline for happiness, if we were using, say, a scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being not happy or unhappy and 10 being super crazy happy, he probably sits somewhere around a 4. And he has to really work to get it to a 6 on most days. And in a vast comparison, I grew up really poor. I come from a family of immigrants. I come from divorce. I was taunted as a kid for being Asian and being different. I've had to battle breast cancer. I've experienced the loss of at least 5 of my beloved pets. I've battled the FTC and lost. I've experienced financial ruin and having to start all over again. I've experienced betrayal in business. I once even had bad credit. So how in the world does my baseline for joy and happiness stay way up here on a scale of, on that scale of 1 to 10? How am I like off the charts at a 20 most of the time? People want to go, how? How is it possible? And I'll tell you why. It's possible because we think differently. And he and I were really breaking this down in just how we see the world. And we have such different perspectives on life. And I want to share with you that the key to your unblocking your own happiness is in this very simple concept of changing the way you see everything, especially how you see yourself. And after you learn to see yourself, it's in learning to see others too. And seeing them on a deep level, a level where you can relate to them versus separate yourself from them. Sometimes people show up and they are a reflection for us. And sometimes that reflection is something that we don't love about ourselves. And so we end up not loving that in that person. And it's such an interesting and fascinating science around how we view the world and how we view others. And as people are a reflection for us, they can also be an actor in our own movie, right? A character in our own story. I've been through a lot of adversity in my life, but I'm definitely not a victim to my circumstances. And that's because I don't identify with victimhood. I identify with being victorious. So when things are going wrong, my viewing lens tells me, hang on, darling, the story is not over yet, because we haven't made it to the part where you're winning again. And that's my expectation. That is the vision I hold for myself and the standard I hold for myself. The perspective that I'm choosing to take is that I am going to emerge a winner. I'm going to be successful. So when life shows up and I'm not winning in that moment, or I'm not in a moment of success, I know that I am not done yet. And for many of you, you're stopping in the middle of the eye of the storm. And this is when things are the most intense. And this is where you're finishing your story. And you're not giving yourself enough room to keep going through the storm, to get past the storm, to experience the calmness and the cleanup and the wisdom that comes after you've been through a storm. So those beliefs, they're keeping you from all of those things that you really want because you're quitting too soon. When I think about life, I think to myself how things seem to happen in a sequence of, or a series of multiple choice options. And those options each lead to outcomes. And if you're stuck in a loop in your own head, asking yourself before you make every move or before you decide on multiple choice, what's good and what's bad, instead of saying, what is the next best step I can take towards what I want this to look like, even though it's a little messy right now, then your ability to hold your own vision for something better when your current circumstances aren't looking so good, that's your resilience factor. And you want to raise your resilience factor because then you can go farther. You can get through those rough patches. And it's the difference between going over big boulders on the road with a bicycle or going over those big boulders with a monster truck. And so many of us need an upgrade because we've been running around on the boulders of life on a bicycle, some of us on a tricycle. We've got to make some upgrades, and we can really only do that. It all starts right here. It starts in how we think about things. If you have been thinking the same way about things for most of your life, and you find that you're in a cycle, or you find that you're in repeated patterns, if you find yourself stuck or in a rut, it's likely because your thinking hasn't upgraded. Your thinking hasn't changed. Some of your beliefs probably need to be looked at so that you can go, do I really believe this? Do I want to believe this? How do I adjust some of my beliefs so that I can actually get to the outcomes that I want? So I want you to think about all of those people who went to work at the Twin Towers on 9/11 and how for many of them it led to their death. And then I want you to think about all the people who didn't go to work that day or woke up late or had a sick kid, whatever the reason, they didn't go into the office that day. And because they didn't, they got to go on living. You might say in your mind, hey, they are the lucky ones. The ones who missed work that day for whatever reason, they got lucky. And maybe that's true. But what's important here to know and find out is, do they believe that they were lucky? Or do they carry a load of guilt and torment because they survived? And they may be saying to themselves, I should have died. And this outlook, right? They can choose to look at it from this blessing of, wow, I'm so lucky, I'm supposed to go on, my life has a bigger purpose. Or they can look at it in this victimhood and this guilt of like, oh, I shouldn't be here right now. How come I wasn't chosen? Wow, I was so close to death. Like there's this crazy push and pull that sometimes we can really do some mental gymnastics around. And that outlook that we choose to have, that lens that we decide to look at life through, that's going to be the deciding factor in how much happiness you can hold in your life. And I want to say that for you again. The outlook that we choose to have, the lens that we decide to look at life through, that is going to be the deciding factor in how much happiness you can hold in your life. There are things that I believe can help you add more joy to your life and invite you to increase your happiness baseline, right? That's what today's show is about. It's about helping you really level up that baseline so that you've got more joy in your life. The first part of this is to stop looking at everything as good and bad, because life is not so black and white. Life comes in a lot of shades of gray. So if you're someone who often looks at a situation and you actually say the words, is that bad? Then I am definitely speaking to you. This speech pattern is your first giveaway for what's coming through in your own mind, because what we think about, we end up bringing about, and often that happens in our words and our actions. And I want you to think about this. What if I told you that nothing is good or bad? Everything is actually neutral. It's neutral until you decide to give it meaning. And we as humans, we love to give things meaning. We do. It's our greatest gift and our greatest downfall in some cases. And I want us to try it out. So I'm going to say to you a scenario, and I want you to give me your instant, be honest with yourself, because right now it's only you. it's you and me and this recording. So I want to give you this phrase, and I want you to just instantly tell me where your mind goes, because this is a nice insight into which way you like to think or how you like to think. So what I'm telling you is, my mom got married at 15 years old and had a baby at 16. Her husband was 18. Is that good, bad, or neutral? Now, I wish I could see the look on some of your faces right now, because most of you immediately decided that this situation was bad. And that's likely because you may hold the bias that she was too young to be getting married, let alone having a baby. He was of age and she wasn't. But I'm going to give you a little more information. And I want to give you something that helps feed your perspective. And that is that, yes, my mom was married at 15 and had her first baby at 16 because she lived in a tiny village in Thailand in the 1940s. And that's how marriages happened in her culture. So to everyone in that village, this was a joyful event, not a sad one. She was the youngest of 7 children, 6 of those being brothers. So you can imagine that any guy was on the hook for how he was going to treat her. And depending on how you view the situation, both things can be true, neither can be true. It can all be neutral. So, as we go through life and we see different scenarios and we see different situations, it's a more practical thing to also think about how you clean, right? Some of you may sweep your floor first, and then you vacuum it, and then you mop it. Others of you might go, I'm skipping the sweeping and I'm going to go straight to vacuuming and mopping. So there's not necessarily a right or wrong way to things. And I think that part is really important. It's what works for you and what gets you to your outcome. So just because Sally doesn't clean the floor exactly like I do I care? Should I care if the floor is clean at the end of the day? So that's perspective. For so many of us, we take these things a step further and we end up making a story out of these situations to give them further meaning, to further justify whether we believe something is good or bad. Because again, we like to give things meaning, we like to be right, and we're always trying to make some justifications. So as we go through life, your nervous system, when this happens, can be all over the place, especially when you're in constant judgment of what's right and what's wrong. And my guess here is that as you're doing that, there are also a lot of judgments you're giving yourself. And that's how you're walking through life. A lot of, am I doing this good? Am I doing this bad? If I do good, then will good happen to me? If I do bad, then is bad going to happen to me? And I have a truth for you. And I don't think that it's news, but it's that bad things still happen to people you consider good. And good things still happen to people that you consider bad. And it happens all the time. Now, I knew a young lady, and she tried to do everything right. She would be described as self-righteous. She held a really high standard for what she believed was the example of living right. She landed her a good-looking, hardworking man. She made sure he and the family went to church on Sundays. They were involved in all the activities. They were involved in all the school activities. She was a volunteer. He did all the church things. They prayed together every night before bed. She would get up early in the morning to make him breakfast and pack him a lunch. And when he came home, she had dinner on the table and a smile on her face and a clean, clean house. They had 2 beautiful and talented daughters who sang in the church choir, and Daddy tucked them in every night. She was a proud woman, and when she would go to family gatherings, she'd remind everyone that she's really perfect with a perfect life. So blessed and highly favored, living that perfect life. And anyone who wasn't doing it the way she was so clearly doing it wrong. They must be bad. There must be sin. They need to spend more time on their knees, repenting for all the pens they stole from the office, whatever. But one day, she happened to go into her daughter's room. And there lay open on the floor her 11-year-old's diary. And the page that was open was a drawing. And the drawing was of her husband with a knife in his throat. Pretty grisly for Daddy's little girl. She did what I think any mother would do. And she went over, picked up the notebook, and she read it. And tears began to flow from her eyes, and a pit began churning in her stomach as she read her daughter's account of her childhood and of what was happening and of how she was feeling and what was going on. This mother pulled herself together. She went straight to the school to pick up her daughters. Then she called the police. And then after that, she called her pastor to let him know that the police were actually going to be by soon to haul her husband off to jail. He was actually at the church attending a men's Bible study that morning. You see, this perfect husband who tucked his kids into bed and prayed with his wife and was a pillar, he'd actually been sexually abusing his daughter since she was a baby. And she was only getting old enough to feel like she could tell a story and share a story, even if it was only in her diary. And that's a true story, y'all. A lot of us are going to say, yeah, that is horrible, outrageously bad. I can't believe this guy. Our tendency is immediately to identify with someone in the story. And many of us are going to identify with probably the little girl. If you're a mom, you're identifying as a mother. Even if you're a father, you may be identifying as the mother in this case as well. And once we grab that identity, this is where we start to create the rights and wrongs, the goods and the bads, and all the things. But what would happen if we insert our own life situations, challenges that are coming up for us? Find that situation, that thing, that part that's been just eating away at you, this piece of the storm that's happening to you, and pull yourself out to this bird's eye view as an observer. Be the person that is outside of what's actually happening right now as you see yourself going through the storm. Because in this same scenario that I just gave you, the story I just told you, what you don't see or know as one of the reasons this father probably justified what he was doing was because his parents did the same thing to him. And while they were doing it, that was how he was learning to be loved. It's twisted and it does not make sense. It definitely does not make it justifiable, but it gives you some insight to how things like this can come about. So, in your own scenario, what are the factors that are playing into why things are like they are? If your story, for example, is that you never get a break and nothing good ever happens, then where in your life do you keep reliving that story? And as part of it, because every time something doesn't work out or seems to not be working out, is that where you stop and give up and then move on to start all over again instead of weathering through some of the pain, weathering through the lesson, sitting with the discomfort of the storm that's happening? Sometimes that happens too. And that's where people are in a pattern. And it's because so many of you, again, are stopping short of allowing yourself to actually really follow through with something. And I'll tell you the other piece of this. Even if you try your best and you follow through and you fall and you fall and you fall, as long as you get back up, you're building that resilience and you are that much closer to getting to where it is you really want to go instead of taking another 20 steps back to start all over again. Because life is a series of us making choices that lead to outcomes. And sometimes we've got to learn to switch things up a little bit. And again, that starts in our mind. So, in the story that I told you, I want you to know that there is a silver lining. And that silver lining is that this mother got to slay her self-righteous dragons, which opened up her to being more empathetic to others and also realizing that we cannot judge a book by its cover. The community that rose up around these girls to love them and support them has been incredible. And the freedom that this child got from the torment that she'd been living with, that's been healing water that needed to flow for her. And also, who knows what ripple of hope and help to other children might come out of this if she continues to advocate for herself and other children who also may be experiencing abuse. And y'all, this is real life. We are all going to experience frustration and challenges and loss and disappointment, possibly abuse, emotional and or physical. But no matter what shows up or has shown up, we have the opportunity to remind ourselves that resilience, that will to keep moving forward or to stop and rest as we're stepping into moving forward, the decision to just not give up, that is the faith that fuels your ability to rise your level of happiness. And I really want to invite you into a perspective shift, because that is truly where all the magic happens. Once we can actually realize that there are many stories happening within the story, our own viewpoint suddenly seems so limited. We're good at doing this with movies because the movies are showing us each character's point of view. So when they come together and there's a miscommunication or something doesn't go quite right, we've seen what's actually happening to each individual. And then we're watching it come together with them as a group. And wow, how things can change, how things can be perceived, how people can they can finish the story themselves without knowing the actual truth of a thing. And when we can grasp the truth around the fact that there's many stories going on, it can teach us to not take things so personally, but rather give us an opportunity to relate to others and also give us a way to own our feelings without needing to blame someone else. So, this is where I would say to you, if I look back on my life, I could say, oh, my father wasn't really there for me. My biological father wasn't there for me. And so that means my life is always going to be messed up when it comes to men and relationships. And I could blame him. And every time I go into a relationship, when it doesn't work out, I could be like, oh, dad's fault. He wasn't there for me. Or I can choose to take ownership over my own feelings of saying, hey, I felt abandoned by my dad. And I can be grateful for that, because you know what? In looking at his life, a lot of that was a hot mess. And I'm glad that I actually wasn't part of it. And I'm so grateful that my stepdad stepped in. And I still had men in my life, my brother-in-law, people who were the adult male examples in my life. So I wasn't left without examples. I wasn't left without good examples. And I can also own that I have the wisdom and the intelligence to go out into the world and get the information I need so that I can heal. If there's any trauma there, I can do somatic therapy. I can do talk therapy. I can just give myself good self-care. When relationships show up, I can look at them and say, what are my patterns? Do I want to run? Is that my tendency? Do I want to overengage? Is that my tendency? How can I have healthy relationships? There's lots of great books, there's lots of great podcasts, there's lots of great coaches that all give expertise in these areas and give us usable things. And this is the information age, y'all. So, whatever information you need, it is there. It is out there in the world. You just need to go get it. And you have an opportunity to consume and learn and show up differently if you want to. You never have to stay in any kind of victimhood. You never have to stay living in the past if you don't want to live there. So I really admonish you to not let the old stuff that eats your energy and eats your time and eats your feelings take up any more free rent in your mind and your heart. In many cases, I would never encourage someone to measure themselves against someone else, unless we're playing a board game. Different scenario, right? Competition in sports, different scenario. But really, playing the comparison game, it's what keeps people in a place of disempowerment in many cases. But for some of you, I am going to actually tell you that when it comes to the area of adversity, then there might be circumstances where you do need to look at other people and how they endure compared to what you've been able to endure so that you can get a sense of gratitude for life. If you're already great at empathizing with people in a healthy way, then you don't need to compare yourself to anyone else. You need to hold yourself to your standard and constantly work to improve yourself based on where you are and who you are and where you're at. But if empathizing skills is something you're still working on, then this is your permission slip to do some comparing. If the last thing that you got upset about was your DoorDash order being cold, then this one is for you. Because according to the United Nations, more than 10,000 children die from hunger every day. And my friends, that's perspective, because if you were in one of those countries where you saw young children dying every day of starvation, when the next time you get served up a platter of food that's probably 5 times the serving size it should be, it can be a great way to center yourself back to a place of gratitude and giving yourself perspective on how much you have versus what you don't have. When I got breast cancer, I could have chosen to be really angry about it. I could have blamed God. I could have blamed bad DNA. I could have blamed the plastics that leach toxins into our water system, since that happens, unfortunately. But I didn't. I was sad and upset and confused, for sure. But I also knew to keep going. I asked myself, how can I live better? How can I be even healthier? How can I not take my body for granted? How can I get more fresh air? How can I work less and play more? How can I reduce the stress in my life? How about get rid of it completely? How can I appreciate each day a little bit more? And by not stopping in the middle of the storm, by coming out of the other side of it, I got to experience how many people just loved me and rallied around me and were supportive of me. I got to turn that pain into purpose. And I got to be part of a beautiful nonprofit that supports women affected by breast and ovarian cancers in a way that I don't know I would have been able to if I hadn't gone through the diagnosis myself. And it's through adversity that I also get to shift that experience into advocacy. And that's the ripple effect. So if one more person walks away more empowered, it was worth it. If one more person gets to understand someone better, it was worth it. So stop blocking your own happiness, because you have the keys to unlock abounding joy in your life. And it starts with shifting your belief in yourself. And I know that it's not your fault. I know that from a really young age that we're taught about right and wrong and good and bad. And we're beaten into submission by repetition for years and years on these things. I really want to invite you to come out of the box of limitations you've been putting yourself in and stop selling yourself short when your story hasn't played out all the way. For every terrible story that's showed up for you, go back and look at each character's point of view. If you learned anything from it, if you helped someone else because of it, or if you can help someone else because of it, then that's your clue. That is your clue that it was life happening for you so that you could be a blessing to someone else. I encourage you to talk about it. Don't hide it. Let it come up so it can come out, and let it unblock that river of happiness that's just waiting to flow out of you. I hope you enjoyed today's show. And if you want more, there's extended content you're going to find only on YouTube at the MADLOVE Your Life Show. For past and current episodes, you can also find us on Spotify, Apple, and wherever you stream the podcast that you love. So, my friends, until next time, may abundance always walk beside you. May joy always go before you. And may love always guide you on your path.
Thank you for tuning in to today's show. We air live every Wednesday at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Bold Brave TV. We hope to see you back next week. For more ways to connect with my guests, content, programs, and retreats, just head over to www.marydee.com and subscribe. That's MARYDEE.com.